Alright, hello everyone, it's silverkyle, and today I'm going to be reviewing WWE's Hell in a Cell 2022 pay-per-view that just wrapped up. So this is going to be my raw thoughts and emotions live right now, just after this. And just a quick background, I've been a big wrestling fan for the past 30 years, essentially, off and on. One of my three first memories ever before I was 4 years old in my entire life, one of them is wrestling. That just tells you how important technically wrestling can be for me, because I've been watching it for so long. Definitely as a kid, I was watching a lot more of it during the late 90s. I mean, that was like the wrestling boom for me. Definitely. Stopped for a few years, got back in the 04-05 era, continued for quite a bit of time, was actually doing reviews like this about 10 years ago, where I was rating matches, and I thought I was getting really good with understanding psychology and all that kind of stuff, and the business side of itself as well. I really like diving into that, but I have not been doing that for quite a few years now, at least the better part of a decade. And now I'm trying to get back into it, so I'm going to be a little bit rusty in terms of talking about things and really catching things that I probably did about a decade ago. But I'm back into it. I threw this out to all of you to see if there would be interest. There was about half of you that did seem like close to half of you that did seem interested in this. For those of you that are here for Omnibus and video games, that's going to still be the main focus of this channel. But I thought that if I'm going to be watching these shows anyway, might as well do a video for it for those of you that do watch wrestling and really enjoy it. So, before we talk about the matches, the only thing that they did announce, first of all, is that Cody Rhodes, who is going to be in the main event of this show in the Hell in a Cell match versus Seth Rollins. The main point and big draw of this show was that match, because Roman Reigns, as the champion, I think is currently injured or whatever the heck is going. I don't like Roman Reigns at all. I think he is the worst not the worst champion. He's the worst. Well, Adam Page wasn't there. Anyway, he's not my favorite. I do not like him at all. And so I'm kind of happy that he's gone, but at the same time, he's a double champion. That's a whole video in of itself. So because the champion of both titles, both world titles, is not here, we're left with Cody Rhodes versus Seth as the main event and the main draw of this show. And Cody Rhodes is injured. He tore his bicep. He has a torn bicep, I believe it was what the injury was reported as, and they announced that right away. But he would still be showing up for the match, which would, gain a lot of babyface reactions and sympathy, which is a smart idea. But I was like, well, that's going to just ruin the main event. Are they just going to have Seth come out and just beat him up in a few minutes, and boom, there you go. Get a lot of heel heat on Seth, got a lot of sympathy for Cody. Could kind of work. We'll talk about that when we get to the main event. But I was very worried about what was going to be happening here, but there was a few things that I thought that they could do to make it really interesting. Let's dive into the first match, which started off with a bang, as they tend to do lately. They start off the shows with one of the bigger matches. This, to me, was the second biggest draw of the show, especially for me anyway, and that would be the women's title of Bianca Belair defending her title versus Becky Lynch and Asuka. Triple threats are not exactly, are technically kind of hard to pull off correctly. I like multi-man, multi-woman matches, but they're much harder to do than a singles match, because you have to always get somebody outside of the ring, so you can you're generally not going to be having a lot of three people wrestling. You're going to have, it's so much easier one-on-one. And I thought that they did a pretty good job. There was a few times where I was like, they got knocked out of the ring for something that was kind of weak looking, that didn't, if they knock a person out with a big move, whether it's outside of the ring or just a high impact move, or there's two people doing some kind of move on that one individual, and then they roll out of the ring, or they throw them out, and then they do like maybe a minute of wrestling before that third person jumps back in, that can kind of work. And there was quite a few times where it did work. Other times where I was kind of like, that didn't look as weak. There was, I think, one part at the beginning of the match where Asuka was rolled out, and she was out there for longer than I thought she should have been for the weak kind of moment that happened there. There was another time too where I think Becky got hit and she was supposed to get pushed out of the ring, and she kind of like let herself go outside of the ring, and I thought that looked kind of weak as well. But for the most part, really good action from everybody. By far, Bianca Belair, I think, is my favorite woman wrestler right now. She just astounds me. She's relatively new still, in terms of being on the main roster, and she's just, her athleticism and her strength just blows my mind how incredibly strong she is to be able to do all these moves and lifting people up and moving around and it impresses the hell out of me. They got to keep doing that. She works so well as a babyface like that. It's so hard to, in this, in the modern era, to be pulling off a proper babyface where the fans are actually into you. It is extremely hard because for the longest time in the 90s basically, and since then it's even very different, but the heels were kind of the ones that people will gravitate towards, the older crowd like myself, and I would be definitely part of that. But Bianca Belair as a babyface because of because of her athleticism, her ring presence, her facial expressions really spot on as well. Becky Lynch is the perfect heel here. Asuka, I think, was potentially over more than both of these wrestlers who are at the top of their game in the women's division here in WWE. I think the crowd really were into Asuka. I'm a fan of hers as well, but I feel like I wanted Bianca to retain here, to continue on with her title reign. At one point we had a double ankle lock from Asuka that looked really awesome, where she kind of had it on Becky and it wasn't the strongest. She kept kind of messing up, and then she got Bianca down, and then she had both of them, and that looked really well. I think that this was where potentially, I can't remember, where she kind of, then they both worked together to get her out, and it looked a little bit flimsy. There was also weird selling. I just put weird selling after that, and I don't really remember I think, oh yeah, so Becky and Bianca were both injured, like their legs were kind of injured, and it just looked kind of awkward, both of them being like limping around, and it just looked weird to me. I can understand kind of what they were going for, and it could have worked, but it just looked off to me. Also, Asuka's burst of energy, I think early on in the match where she was just taking it to Becky, looked really good. I enjoyed that. Ending, and then when we got to the end of the match, Bianca doing what Becky would have done. So she basically, Becky basically had the match won, and then Bianca just ran in and kind of threw Becky out and got the win. Kind of a little bit anticlimactic, but worked for the match because of afterwards, it's exactly what Becky would have done. And Bianca was one up ahead of her, and her facial reaction afterwards, which I think is extremely important in selling some of these storylines when you're in the match and outside of the match as well. And WWE really likes a lot of stuff outside of the match. That's their main selling point, is the stories that are going into this, although a lot of the stories usually are not very good. But Bianca just being like, ha, got one over you, I beat you kind of thing, was excellent. I'm going to give it 3 3.75 stars out of 5. Really good stuff. A few missteps here and there with some of the selling, a few points, but really enjoyed a lot of this. And Bianca, I think, was they actually all did a great job. I was really impressed with this match. It actually might be a 4-star match. Then we had Lashley versus Omos versus MVP, or Lashley versus Omos and MVP in a handicap match. I feel like this should have been the other way around. I really feel like this should have been a Raw match that they had, where it's a handicap match leading into a pay-per-view or something. And if Lashley, no, I don't think. I just think that, getting MVP by himself should have been the main goal. So if Lashley could beat Omos, then you could have him in a singles match against MVP. And maybe that's what they're going to go with down the road, still, to have Lashley go up against MVP, because he's the reason why, who sided with Omos and kind of screwed over Lashley. And I think that's, you're going after the manager that screwed you over. Really works well for this kind of a match. Lashley is super over. The crowd is really into him. I'm going to try not to say over anymore. I'm just going to say that if the crowd was really into it, because anyway. The crowd seemed really into Lashley. Not the greatest match because of Omos. He's not a Khali, but so you have the great Khali, who's a horrible big man. Then you've got Undertaker, who's at the top. Then you've got Kevin Nash and Kane around here. And then you've got Omos, who's about here. So he's not like Kevin Nash and Kane are not the greatest workers. Even Big Show would be in that category, around here. And you've got Great Khali at the very bottom. And then you've got Omos, who's better than Khali, but not by much. I don't think, I think that if Omos had maybe another year or two of training and could really understand how to properly wrestle and understand things a lot more, that this could have been a great fight, because Omos is gigantic and Lashley, who's a massive dude, looks so small. Well, he does, like the height difference clearly makes a difference, but at the same time, because of how beastly Lashley is built, it works. And Lashley's offense, when he's punching and throwing everything he can at Omos, he almost makes up for Omos selling, and taking the hits. Lashley really did as much as he possibly could in all his matches against Omos to try to make Omos look like he's a legitimate threat, that Lashley is having a hard time by throwing everything. Like, just the way that he punches, really good job. But Omos is not the greatest. And it's kind of like whoever had the idea for the layout of the match was as best as we could possibly get for what we're working with here. But the problem is that Omos just can't do it. He doesn't have the experience to properly do it. And I think Lashley was doing the best that he can. We ended up getting at one point Cedric Alexander, I believe is his name. He kind of showed up, who used to be in the Hurt Business, and he kind of allowed Lashley to get that win. Another thing too is that at one point Omos had ran out to I think MVP had smacked him in the corner, like with a drive-by kick, and then it pushed Lashley out of the ring. Omos then got tagged in and ran out to him and pushed him into the barricades, and we almost had like a count out there, and that really got the crowd into and behind Lashley. And after that, they were pretty much with him the entire time. So that was really well done. It's just the rest of the match was not very good. I'd give it about 1.75 stars, mainly because of how they booked that properly and how Lashley did a great job of trying to stay over. And Lashley ended up winning because of the Cedric kind of showing up to kind of mess things up. And now I'm curious to see is this feud going to continue, or is it done now? And then I was thinking, are Cedric and Lashley going to be, going together? But they ended up talking later in the night, and it seems like they're cool with each other, but to never do that again. So it looks like they're going to go their separate ways still. Maybe now we have Cedric versus Omos. That could be a potential feud that they're going to go with down the line. I'm not really sure. But then they also had Lashley kind of pointing towards that he wants the title, and the crowd wants that, and it sounds like a good idea. But if that just means that then now we're going to have a Lashley versus Roman feud, Lashley's just going to be fed to Roman, and I don't want that at all. Lashley is better than that, and I don't think that he deserves to be fed to Roman at all. He should I would rather him in another feud with somebody else. And honestly, even if Lashley ended up losing, I'd be fine with that. I just do not want him to be fed to Roman. You're going to get that. If you're a big Roman Reigns fan, I'm sorry. I'm just going to be trashing him pretty much the entire time, even when he's not on the show, because he's the champion. All right, then we have Kevin Owens versus Ezekiel. Kevin Owens was in the main event of night 1 of WrestleMania like 2 months ago against Stone Cold Steve Austin, arguably the either top draw of wrestling or the second draw of wrestling. Definitely the biggest draw of wrestling in the 90s and early 2000s. And he hadn't wrestled for 19 years. He came back. He beat Owens, which I was okay with. But then they put Owens into a feud with Ezekiel, who is Elias, pretending not to be Elias. And it's such a stupid mid-card feud. And Kevin Owens can do a good job. I mean, he's trying his best to make this feud work, because the guy can sell almost anything. But man, he deserves so much more. And he wasn't even on Backlash. I wanted him to be on Backlash. Honestly, that's when the match should have happened, I think, in a much better way. And it's just a stupid comedy thing that I think is just a waste of Kevin Owens, especially when he ended up being against Austin and losing to Austin, which I think is still okay. But now he needs to bring himself back up, and this is not the right way to do it. Dumb storyline, but at least I will say that the offense that I was seeing from Ezekiel, for most of it, there was a few times where I think he was kicking Owens in the corner, and that just looked absolutely horrible. But for the most part, Ezekiel kind of impressed me, because I never liked him as Elias. And he's got a little bit more burst inside of him. I think it's a mid-card thing that did nothing really for Owens. It doesn't do anything for Ezekiel either, because then eventually Owens won. And so now we have Owens, who should properly win, obviously, but Ezekiel just started and is, as this new character. and he loses right away on his first pay-per-view match. Granted, it is against Kevin Owens, but that does nothing. It doesn't do anything for Kevin, because it's just, to me, like a new guy that, because of the storyline, is so stupid. This is like a Santino. It's almost like Santino Marella, who was a comedy act that was over with the crowd, that the crowd liked, wasn't over, that the crowd enjoyed, but it was a comedy act that's for mid-cards, and there's nothing wrong with having comedic mid-card stuff every so once in a while, if it's done properly. I find R-Truth is way better at it than Santino Marella ever was. And Ezekiel is just, that's not entertaining to me. Anyway, and I give that 2.5 stars. It was okay. I'm impressed with what Ezekiel was doing for the most part, but it was a relatively short match too. Then we had the Judgment Day versus AJ Styles, Finn Balor, and Liv Morgan. Can't remember how to pronounce her name. I like this idea. I like who's in the Judgment Day, mainly just Edge, honestly. But I'm okay with Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley, who I think really needed to go heel and join this, because when she was a face and in tag teams, that was just horrible. When she would be smiling next to her like partners, I hated that. That was so corny, and I think that it brought Rhea Ripley, who seemed like a legitimate contender for going for the titles, to being this joke of a tag team partner smiling and like hugging them. Did not go at all with her character. She's much better served in this Judgment Day heel stable. I really like the idea of Styles, Finn Balor, and Morgan together. I like the dynamic of them. And mixed tag matches can be difficult. Sometimes they do make sense, and you can get behind them. I think that a few months back when we had Miz and Maurice versus Edge and Beth Phoenix, that worked really well for the story that they were going with, and this one worked as well because of the Morgan and Ripley's background of they used to be a tag team and then they ended up splitting up. Worked really well. It was a it's a 6-man match, so it's hard to do this without going, because you have to really build the matchup properly. There was a few hot tags. I mean, Balor was, in dire straits for the longest time. Eventually got the hot tag to Styles, who just wanted to really get Edge in the match and finally do some damage to him. It was entertaining. At one point too, I remember when Balor was on the top ropes, and a lot of people have a hard time being on the top ropes. I mean, Jeff Hardy's a different category altogether, but he's been having a really hard time getting there, who's in AEW now. But anyway, a lot of people have a hard time going on the ropes, and that's where you can have a lot of botches. Balor is so steady that he's on the top rope, standing up, and I don't think he's holding onto the ropes. He's like almost all the way up, and Rhea Ripley goes up and starts shaking the ropes to cause him to fall down. And he waited like a second or two before he eventually fell, because he's so steady on there. That was impressive from Balor. Just something that I noticed. Now I really like that. And then he eventually fell over and it created for something. I give this match 3 stars and a quarter. I think it was some pretty fun stuff. Not the greatest. I think that but kind of for a 3 versus 3, not bad. As a mixed tag match, it wasn't bad. Then we had Corbin versus Madcap Moss. I don't like Corbin. I don't think that Madcap Moss, I'm not sold on necessarily yet, and I think that his gimmick for the longest time with the suspenders was the dumbest idea ever, even as a heel. It's stupid. When you put on suspenders, you lower yourself to the lower mid-card comedy act, and that's where I don't like. Now, if they wanted to keep him like that forever, fine, but now it looks like maybe he's actually going to be taking it a little bit more seriously because he got rid of the suspenders, and I totally forgot that they had a match at Backlash. I totally forgot that. Why is it that Corbin and Madcap Moss are on 2 pay-per-views, but they can't find some like, there's so many people that should be wrestling instead of Madcap Moss and Corbin on 2 pay-per-views in a row. That's insane. That's so wrong on so many levels. But either way, they ended up having a match. Wasn't really looking forward to it at all. It was a no holds barred match. They did some stuff on the outside that was kind of nice. I did get into that. there was at one point too where they weren't selling anything. Oh, it's no holds barred match, and for these matches they can work if you sell properly. The problem is that at one point Madcap tripped Baron into falling head first into an open chair. He gets whacked in the face, and then right afterwards Madcap goes on the ropes and then runs to Corbin. Corbin springs back up and slams him down. I'm like, you didn't sell any of that. That's not, if you're going to get smacked in the freaking, do you know how hard that would hit in real life? Like, you're supposed to suspend your disbelief for wrestling, but when something that should have knocked them out for a little bit, at least for like a 2 count, 2 and like 9/10 of a count for a pin, because you got whacked in the face with a chair, you don't just jump back up, which is where I have problems with wrestling sometimes, especially nowadays, because they just want to go, and you need to sell. You need to have moments where you are both down and you just barely get your arm over, and you have to try to get the crowd into it. You have to look exhausted. That's what makes a good match. After that, though, then Corbin did a great job selling, where he had a chair in the corner and Madcap got out of the way and he hit it head first once again. And then afterwards, the look on his face made him look like he was actually concussed and out of it. Great job there. Also, I will say that Corbin, as much as I don't like him, he did a great job as a heel in this. I don't really value him at all being worthwhile in the company, but he did a good job. Like, he constantly kept going against with what the fans wanted and would tease things, and he had the crowd. He was controlling the crowd as a proper heel. I have to give him kudos for that. And it actually brought up my like of the match because of that. And also, I will say that during this, Madcap was actually trying to sell quite often, where he was selling a lot of the offense and a lot of the moves and the severity of this being a whole no holds barred match, where he was trying his best to sell and slow things down and slow the pace down of the match, because he'd be constantly like knocked out kind of thing. And I liked that. I really liked that. So much better than I thought it would be. I'm going to give it 3 stars. I just expected this to be absolute crap, and it was actually pretty good. Next up, we had the US title being defended on the pay-per-view, and it's Theory versus Mustafa, I think is what I thought it was. I can't remember how to pronounce it. Mustafa Ali. I like Theory. I think that he needs some kind of gimmick, more than what he's got being the selfie kind of guy. I think that he's got a bright future. He's one of the few people that I'm actually rooting for that's young and potentially a future star in this company. And I haven't seen that in 7 years, probably. I finally finding somebody that I'm rooting for that's a new star. That's a long time that WWE has just been kind of sticking with the same people for the longest time, and it's been kind of scary. But I just still feel like this match wasn't the greatest, and Theory needs some kind of other gimmick. I don't know what it is, but he needs to find himself something, because I think that he's got enough charisma, and Vince being with him could work really well as well if he would show up maybe a little bit more. I think Vince is 76, so I don't know if that's the greatest idea, but if he's already there at Raw, why not show up every once in a while and be part of it? I think it could maybe work, or just find something else for Theory. There was a botch at one point too, and I can't remember what it was, potentially where basically they were in the corner and Theory was up top and Mustafa was going to do something, but Theory was punching him or something, so Mustafa decided to jump backwards, and then he injured his leg on the landing, his right leg, I think, and so then afterwards Theory jumped off, and then Mustafa had to right away kick him, which hit Theory, and then Theory was injured with his leg. And once again, it's kind of like the weird thing of Becky and Bianca, where they were both selling, although this looked really weird because then they were both trying to sell at the same time. It was really weird. I didn't particularly like that. And then we go to the finish, and eventually Theory wins, and I'm happy that he won. I think that that was the good decision to keep him going forward, because he needs momentum, I believe. And 2.5 stars, okay match, nothing great. Just a lot of there was no really great pacing. There was no great story that was really being built up in this match here. It was just essentially, to me, like a lot of moves. Not the greatest. Then we had the main event, Hell in a Cell, Cody Rhodes versus Seth Rollins. Seth Rollins, I hate the idea of calling him Seth freaking Rollins. I hate him running out and laughing because now he's got such a weird gimmick. I think the best time that Seth Rollins was around was when he was with the Authority. I thought that was his best version that we had ever seen. And then I think he had a babyface run not long after that I was okay with as well. This version of him, when he's laughing, is dumb. And not in a good heel way where I'm just like, you're better than this. And I think that you could do a much better job being a heel, getting the crowd to go against you, and laughing is not the way to do it. Also, Seth freaking Rollins. What does freaking mean? You throw that, you slap that onto anybody. What does that mean? What is the gimmick of being called Kyle freaking Browse? What is that? Silver freaking Kyle? That adds nothing. That's, granted, a silver Kyle isn't the smartest idea either, but I'm not wrestling. Goodness. I do like, though, really like that Seth Rollins, part of his gimmick is that he gets in the minds of his opponents. He did it with Roman Reigns at Royal Rumble when he came out in the Shield attire. This time around, he came out in Dusty's polka dot suit from the WWE era. And that where I was like, that's well done. Then you had Cody come out. He takes his jacket off and it's purple. And you're now, because I was like, okay, well, how bad is the injury? Is this just an angle that they're trying to sell? No, it's legit. And he's going to wrestle. And he wrestled the entire match. I don't know how they got to do this. Every time that they were doing something and he injured himself, I'm like, not only is he doing a great job selling this, he probably doesn't even have to sell it because of how much it's actually hurting him. I was cringing, and I don't know if this is the right move. I think that they could have had a few minutes of Cody, if he was actually legit, because he was legit injured. I think you could have just had, but then you don't really, that was the main selling point of the pay-per-view, and you don't really have any other match that really could have lived up to it because Roman Reigns is the champion, and he's not on the show. Anyway, not that, for me, Roman would not have saved it. Anyway, no matter who, unless he lost the title, and in that case, it's just because I'm so happy that the title's off of him, and it's not in a good, anyway, and we're not diving into that. I'm just saying that, like, I felt like if you just had Seth beat him quickly and just hitting him a few times and just going for the arm and not really injuring him, like going for different holds and then stopping and then laughing, that almost actually works. That would actually kind of work with his gimmick of laughing and just constantly going back to the arm, and you do that for 5-10 minutes or something and then just beat him because Cody can't fight back kind of thing. Have a few times where he is trying to fight back. But no, Cody did a great job for the longest time. Any of his offense, he really did try not to use his arm at all because he probably couldn't that much. It was done really well. We had moments where he brought in the bull rope, which his father was really well known for, and they put that on. I think that slowed it down just a little bit too much for me, but it was a good idea at the same time to do that because that Cody didn't really have much that he could do, and maybe that was kind of evening the odds. I liked that. I liked quite a bit of the back and forth action, and they took their time to sell things because they were, in Hell in a Cell. So you kind of have to. There wasn't anything crazy, and I didn't really expect anything because that Cody was injured. I'm curious to see what they would have had, though, had Cody not been injured. Was there any big spots that they were actually planning for this match? But I still think that they did a pretty good job with this. The only thing that I didn't really like was near the end when Seth hit the crossroads on Cody, and then Cody got right back up once again and hit the crossroads back. And I thought that it was just too fast. I thought that, you gotta set, when you're hit with a finisher, even if it's your own finisher, I think that, he doesn't have to lose by that, but it was just spamming too many finishers. Although at the very end, and then it did making sense for when Cody did hit two crossroads in a row and went for the sledgehammer, and because of their history with everything with AEW, with Triple H, for both of them, it worked. It was just maybe a little bit too much, and I think that they could have built it up just a little bit more. That's Cody needed to use the the sledgehammer to win. Maybe not being able to hit the crossroads. Maybe having, maybe he hit one early on in the match and it was only one because he did do that. And then after that, Seth just injures the arm too much and now he can't grasp it anymore. Or, saying that because that he couldn't grab on with his right arm, that it wasn't as strong of a finish. And I think that the commentary could have maybe done that. And having Rhodes just after hitting it, just being too injured, and then he has to go for the cover and it's a few seconds off. You could have had a few things, and then eventually at the end, because of the sledgehammer is in and he hits a weak looking, crossroads, only one, his only other, maybe have one at the beginning of the match and we see that it doesn't work the greatest. He hits the second one near the very end of the match. Then he goes and says, I know that that's not going to be enough. He goes for the pin. It's not enough. And he goes and grabs the sledgehammer afterwards and then whacks him. That would have been a little bit better of a story. But still, I think that they did a pretty good job here. It's like 3 3/4 or 4 stars. It was hindered by a few things here and there, but overall, I was pretty happy with this match. So that's it. That is my review for Hell in a Cell. I've been talking for 30 minutes. This is probably why maybe I shouldn't do these videos that often, is because I can talk so much about it. Granted, this is my first one in like, I don't know, probably 10 years or something. So I really want to get everything off my chest. I'm going to try to pull these things back and make them a little bit more, 10 to 15 minutes I think is the sweet spot for these. But if for those of you that like really long videos where I talk about a lot of stuff, hopefully this is what you were looking for. So overall, it was an okay show. 2 really good matches that really stood out. Some lower card stuff that just, there's a lot that could have been worked on to make this a better show. But overall, not horrible. And I feel like that's kind of sad because that's where the state of wrestling is for WWE, where if it's not too bad, I'm kind of satisfied, which is not the greatest. So there you have it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of all of this. And thank you all for watching. You have been bearded in. Beardage.